Hello? Yeah. You have mentioned that the VMware server comes with its own operating system. To my understanding, it's not much more than a Red Hat that is sophisticated and comes with VMware. Or is there anything more regarding the layers of the system, hypervisor, supervisor, or whatever? Is the ESX server much different, or isn't it?
This is a very good question. I don't really know the answer.
I know some of the answer. The ESX server, it uses a modified Red Hat to boot up, but then it switches to a completely different root mode kernel. So it looks like Red Hat, but...
It switches to what? The door is open.
Oh, yes.
Anyways, sorry.
Yeah. The ESX server, it starts up with a modified Red Hat, but then it just loads the ESX kernel, which is completely different. It's not Linux based. Yeah.
Yeah, and this makes perfectly sense because it's a speed optimization as well. If you don't have to undo everything you do just to fake that nothing has happened for the operating system. If the host operating system is aware of virtualization, you can save a lot of cycles there. And maybe even complete mode switches. But one thing I haven't said that just comes to mind in terms of performance is running VMware actually really makes your host operating system a little slower, because every time there is some interrupt, it will not get handed up directly to the operating system, but it will first be intercepted by VMmon and then get handed up. So if you're doing real-time stuff or high-performance stuff, maybe it's not a good idea to run another operating system in a virtual machine at the same time.
Hello? Have you looked into the traps that VMware has for like communicating with the actual VMware software from within, like the guest operating system? Like there's a couple of special instructions for detecting whether you're running within VMware, but there's also stuff like give me the physical resolution or change the physical resolution that the tools use. And apparently I was just told that you can disable that, but it doesn't really work in all cases. Have you looked at that, into that at all?
No.
No, okay.
Is there a time impact or a slowdown in having VMware just installed and its daemons running without a guest operating system running, or is it?
No. No. As long as you're not running virtual machines, VMmon will never be called. So VMmon is only called by the VMware executable, and it will then direct everything to itself. But as long as you don't run the user mode component, there's no sense in intercepting anything, no.
Thank you.
So for the various hardware devices that exist that you access from within a VM, like video, sound, USB, how many of them are full-on emulated devices that you speak to and then it speaks to the hardware, versus how many of them are actually doing direct pass-through of instructions from the guest OS to the parent hardware? Do you know?
I think that that depends on what actual implementations and what versions of the virtualization solutions you're talking about. So the desktop operating system of VMware don't support at all any pass-through to the host devices. I think the server versions do in part, for example, to have direct access to network cards. But all this is a security problem. For example, if you want to access a network card, the network card might be able to do DMA, and DMA is not done through virtual memory, but can talk to memory directly, to physical memory directly, and if you allow some virtual machine to do that, it could override anything in any other virtual machine because it just doesn't know about that. So you would need either hardware that is aware of virtualization. For example, the vPro platform of Intel has a network card that is aware of that, and all the DMA accesses go through the MMU as well. Or you have to have some small layer in between.
So would you agree that you should not be using VMware as a security solution? Because a lot of people really want to.
I think I'd need more time to comment on that. Of course, it's always possible to exploit even complex software, and it surely should be possible to exploit a solution like VMware in some way. But the whole system, well, they had security in mind. They cannot pass through things for a security purpose. For example, I know one thing about VMware where there was a possible trade-off between security and performance, or security and not working at all. For example, the first AMD CPUs, the first AMD 64 CPUs, they, with their 64-bit mode, VMware and Parallels, and I don't know, not Parallels, just VMware, they implemented having 64-bit guests as well. But as you might know, the first AMD 64 CPUs did not support that new version of VMware. They could do 32-bit virtualization, but if you had one of these steppings of the first AMD 64 CPUs, you could not do 64-bit virtualization. This was because of some bug in the first AMD 64 CPUs. Well, it wasn't really a bug. They omitted a feature that the 32-bit CPUs had, and they thought that the 64 CPUs didn't need anymore. But they didn't think of virtualization. So VMware had the choice of either not being perfectly secure, but being able to run 64-bit virtualization on these early AMD 64 CPUs, or just not run it all on these CPUs. And they chose that their solution just would not run at all.
And do you know how they do for like 3D hardware like DirectX or OpenGL or whatever? Because Wine, for example, translate the DirectX.
Microphone 2 should be open.
Oh. Wine translate, for example, the DirectX API to OpenGL calls, and do you know how VMware does that? Because I used VMware to play some games quite years ago, and I remember that it was quite fast, and I was wondering how they were doing it, like direct hardware access, and I doubt they're doing that because from a security point of view it would be a disaster, but I don't know.
It would be new to me that VMware can really pass through DirectX commands. I know that it can emulate some CPU, and maybe the drivers can do some basic 2D stuff, and Windows can then emulate all that, and maybe the machine was quite fast so that it was enough to do emulation of 3D. But passing DirectX through an interface, that's a really, really complex thing, and also for security that's a problem.
Thanks.
Hello. I've actually been watching you on the TV in the speaker room, and I ran all the way over here after I saw that the questions don't end because, well, I was about to ask a question, and then Danny here told me that everybody already knows about it. So, yeah. I wanted to ask your opinion about, for obvious reasons, to use VMM for ICE.
Huh?
Dan will help me out because he already said, yeah, everybody knows about it.
So you can't do debugging as easily anymore because the code has all this anti-debugging stuff. So what have you seen with regards to using VMMs for debugging, like a GDB that lives outside of the host operating system?
I know that QEMU is a great, great debugging tool for operating systems because it is open source and all kinds of people have installed various hooks in there. And I know several projects that use QEMU for that. But I don't think that VMware has any hooks in there. So that's one thing that I've looked into myself. They want to do desktop virtualization, they want to do compatibility solutions, isolation solutions, server solutions, but development for user mode applications, but I haven't really seen VMware being used for kernel debugging or anything.
Well, maybe Dan is talking about VMware. I'm actually talking something like Joanna Rutkowska rootkit.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to repeat that. I'm actually talking about something the sort of like running ICE from something like Joanna Rutkowska's rootkit. Not really the rootkit, but the technology itself. Pretty cool. Think about it. Yeah, everybody laugh now, but wait just a few years.
Well, I'm really not sure whether this is the same type of question or comment as just before. This VT technology, does it make rootkits development easier? Are we going to see more lightweight rootkits such as Blue Pill in future due to VT or PELs?
This is a very good question. I'm glad you asked. There's a very good blog entry of one of the VMware developers on his blog, and he says that this whole Blue Pill thing just isn't worth the time thinking about it, because everything that Blue Pill can do can already been done today with other tricks. For example, with the tricks that VMware does. Of course, VMware is complex and VT makes it easier, but there are other tricks which don't perfectly virtualize the system and which aren't perfectly undetectable, but which are pretty much undetectable. For example, one good hack that you can do, which is almost as good as something as VT or Blue Pill, is that you can use a segment limit. Well, segmenting is something that x86 has been having for a long time, but nobody has been using it since modern operating systems. So you have a segment base and a segment limit, and you typically set the base to 0 and the limit to 4 gigabytes. But if you set the limit to 4 gigabytes minus 1 page, then you can put your own hypervisor, your own rootkit code into the uppermost page, and well, you are completely hidden from your host operating system. So you can direct all the interrupt vectors to you, all the exceptions to you. You can basically, in a way, virtualize the system already with a hack like this. It is not completely undetectable because it's not so perfect as VT. But also VT is very hard. It is very hard to make a solution with VT that is totally undetectable, because there is always some performance impact that you can measure. For example, if you have a CR3 reload, you can do a CR3, well, it can be cached, but if you load random values into CR3, then there will be a VM exit, there will be world switches, and you can measure these by time. Of course, your rootkit could fake your time, but then it gets very, very complex.
Well, as people didn't like my last one, I have a different type of question, which is less technical, but well, okay. Licenses, actual software licenses, have really been impacting the VM technology, because, for example, people would use the same hardware server, the same machine, to run, say, 5 IIS servers. And now everybody is changing licenses to say every single instant of the installation.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of stuff that can be done technologically. Do you believe personally there are technological ways that people are going to start using in order to cheat around that? And how do you think such licenses actually impact the technology, if at all?
So the question is whether there is a way to detect, no, to work around detection.
I'll give you the Gaudi translator. Hold on.
So, for example, the home versions of Vista have actually banned using virtual machines at all.
But is it just a licensing thing?
It is
or
a licensing.
Okay.
It is a licensing issue, licensing thing. The question is, do you see licensing problems making it more difficult to legally use virtual machines?
Now, this is a political question.
It is.
I'm not going to answer political questions.
It's actually.
I'm an engineer. I'm not a politician.